The International Association for Near-Death Studies presents NDE Radio, a weekly exploration of near-death experiences and similar encounters with the other side. Now, here's your host, Lee Witting.
Welcome to NDE Radio, brought to you by IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. I'm your host, Lee Witting. And with us on the show today is Dr. Raymond Moody, the man who pioneered modern research into NDEs. His interest in the subject began with his study of early Greek philosophy and Plato's powerful story of the warrior the classic tale of near-death experiences told in Plato's Republic. Dr. Moody's PhD in philosophy was followed a few years later by an MD in psychiatry and his work in forensic psychiatry. Dr. Moody is best known for his groundbreaking, best-selling 1975 book, Life After Life, in which he coined the term near-death experience. But that was just the beginning of his exploration of how we might understand NDEs in a world given over to the constricted notion that science is the only path to knowledge. Dr. Moody, Ray, welcome to NDE Radio.
Thank you, Lee. It's good to be with you. Thank you very much.
It's wonderful to hear your voice, and I wanted to say that I first heard you speak at an IANS conference in Durham, North Carolina a few years ago.
Yeah.
And your topic was to define and emphasize the importance of skepticism as a philosophic tool for keeping an open mind.
Yeah.
And it seemed to me then that you were defining a middle path between faith and science, a path that was necessary for a truer understanding of NDEs. Did I get that right?
What a great way of putting it, Lee. I never thought about it that way, but that's exactly right. Because the way I think of it, you say a path between science and religion, and that is very interesting way to put it. That's exactly the thought I have, and the way I put it is that I think, have always thought that this question of life after death is at least in 2017, is a philosophical question, not yet a scientific question. And even in Life After Life, I emphasize that. And it's always been rather distressing to me when I hear people say, oh, near-death experiences are scientific proof or scientific evidence of an afterlife. And that is precisely why so many serious scholars are put off by this area, because people hear that who really know about scientific method and so on. And this is still a philosophical question. It really is, and it's always been. And the breakthrough in this field will come through philosophy, I think. So it's, since I have an MD behind my name, people think of that as my qualification. But I was doing this research 10 years before I went to medical school.
Yes.
When I was in. So, and I think that's a very important message to hear, because I think that there really are entirely new ways to open this question up. But I think it will be very difficult to swallow for what I call the afterlife establishment, people who are sort of dead set on this being, scientific. I read this book a few months back. It's an excellent book, by the way, that was published by IANS. You might know the new and collection of all sorts of interesting cases. I think it was put together by IANS people in Europe, as I recall.
Yes, it was translated from the Dutch, and IANS paid for the translation, and some of the editing work was also done by IANS.
Oh, cool. And it's such a wonderful book, and I think to me it was marred by that statement in there. It said, there's only two ways to research this. One is by empathetic phenomenological analysis, that is just sort of saying what the experience are, or parapsychology, and they dropped that in there. And that is a terrible false dilemma. That's just absolutely not true. Parapsychology is a pseudoscience. As nice as the people are, and they are my friends, and they are your friends too, and this is not personal. We all have this conversation all the time, but I just think it's a really unfortunate thing that people are dead set on making this into a scientific problem, and they therefore ignore the conceptual philosophical issues, which I think are really the crux of the problem. But anyway.
Right. I was just thinking that parapsychology may be a new age version of philosophy without the depth and background that real philosophy has.
You know, I think there's a lot to that. It's people whose emphasis is on science, or, they have in this scientism mindset, and that they haven't had really any training in philosophy. I think it's very easy for that kind of mind who gets interested in this kind of thing to just leap forward to saying, well, let's try it scientifically, without going through the essential preliminary step of asking what is the proper mode of inquiry. Mm-hmm. And I haven't changed my opinion since I started out in this, or the opinion I stated in 1974 when I wrote Life After Life, that to think of this as some scientific enterprise is barking up the wrong tree. But more importantly, it's keeping people from the genuine advances that could be made with this if we start looking at it as a conceptual problem. But the really difference is, Plato said it really beautifully. He said in his Phaedo, which in my opinion, that's still the premier or the best rational or best work that's ever been done on life, the question of life after death from a genuinely rational perspective. And what Plato says is that the big problem that's always going to be in any kind of rational afterlife research is, he said two things. There's always got to be some storyline, right? Because the notion of an afterlife, even though it may bring beautifully warm, fuzzy images to our mind, is nonetheless, it's not a clear notion at all. And so we need some kind of story, Plato said, just to get our thoughts about this started. And the stories we are so fascinated with these days are the near-death experiences. And I have heard thousands and thousands of these, and I can't wait to hear the next one. It's always a fresh adventure.
I know they're so universal, and yet they're so personalized.
They are. It's always blended a little bit with the personality and the temperament of the person. And then Plato said, as wonderful as the stories are, that in order really to make an advance in the rational understanding of this, we have got to have some set of concepts to link the stories with the claim that there's an afterlife. And the situation has not changed since he wrote that 2,400 years ago. And it's just a shame because, and another thing about it, see, I mean, I'm not looking down on on anyone in any way by making this remark, but I mean, just as a plain matter of observation, if you think about it, I mean, I am a very weird person in a way because I just love to think about concepts. As I said in Life After Life, I came to this from the point of view of logic and philosophy of language and ancient Greek philosophy. And so to me, I just love to think concepts. But, the very vast majority of people who are interested in this, they love the stories. but as soon as you start thinking conceptually,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of lose interest. And in my opinion, that is really the main factor that holds back progress in this. And then on top of that, when somebody from a rational background does begin to look at these stories, then immediately they leap to the conclusion that, let's look at it as scientists, whereas that's just not the right, methodology to use. Matter of fact, The real problem is we don't have a methodology yet, and that there needs to be some conceptual thinking to figure out one, which incidentally, and to me, bragging is about one of the worst, most obnoxious behaviors ever. So I hope you will understand when I say this, that I'm not trying to brag or anything, but rather to sort of issue this as a challenge, and that what I think, and I base that on the opinion of some colleagues in various fields, from psychology and business and astronomy and logic and just a lot of different fields, that I think I have solved the essential problem that we do now have new concepts that we can apply to this most important question of human existence, because it is. And that's one reason I get so irritated about people who just want to act as though this is already solved, or because it's a great intellectual adventure that we're on here in approaching the biggest question of human existence. It is. I mean, there is nothing bigger than this one, because everything turns on this in a way. Because let's conjecture or assume for a moment that there is an afterlife. Then assuming that is true, then the whole system spins around a time or two on its axis, because it's everything else is in contention in a way if there's an afterlife, because everything else we think we know in this world is would be changed around totally.
Yes, exactly. Our concept of reality on Earth is going to be totally changed if we can prove that afterlife.
That's right.
Yeah.
And
Ray, at your recent talk here in Maine, I realized that you and I shared two loves in our childhoods, and we're the same generation, basically. One was for astronomy, and the other was for Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge.
Donald Duck and Uncle Scrooge.
One was a love of vast beauty, going out with a telescope at night, and the other was a love for absurd fantasy. And I was going to, and I see in your work today that those two things are coming together again, aren't they?
Yeah, I have a complete collection of Donald Ducks and Uncle Scrooges from my childhood.
I'm going to come camp out at your house for a week and go through them all again.
And my two grown sons were raised on them. They're now 46 and 43. And then I have a grandson, Ray, who's 10, almost 11, and he reads them assiduously. And, you might be interested to know that both Spielberg and Lucas have both attributed a lot of their work to Karl Barks, who was the artist and author of those comics. Yeah.
But when we look at the vastness, I mean the notion implied by NDEs, I mean I see that as connected to astronomy in a way. I mean the way that you would look at the Andromeda Nebula, for instance, or the face of the moon, or the light coming from the end of the tunnel. I mean, that's all so related in the way humans consider the reality of things.
Yes.
And then I know you are also working right now on the idea that nonsense is an approach to take. And in fact, I'm looking forward to your lecture on Tuesday, because tomorrow.
I'm looking forward to you being there, because I think I can show you. Although this one is a bit brief, but we can have follow-ups if you want to. But I think that this one, is 2 hours or something. But even in that time, I think I can show you that if there is a rational process where we can have an entirely new light on near-death experiences that opens up entirely new ways to investigate the afterlife question. And see, to me, it's like you probably had the same experience when you were a kid, where when I looked through the telescope for the first time, I realized that I would never know much of anything, for one thing, which is great with me. I know I'm ignorant. To me, and that doesn't bother me, to me, the joy of the pursuit of knowledge is just discovery and learning what you can, right? Mm-hmm. But I realized when I was looking through a telescope my first time that, the question naturally occurs, which I'm sure you thought this too. It's like, well, how big is this thing we're in, and what size is it, right? Well, then your mind rushes out to the wall, right? But then you think, just a minute here, doesn't there have to be something on the other side of a wall?
Yes.
But then the only other option in common sense seems to be that it goes on forever and ever and ever. And that makes no sense either. So from very early in my childhood, I was completely at peace with the notion that this world that we're living in is unintelligible. That is, that we are bounded on all sides by nonsense. Then I got hooked on Karl Barks, and there's a lot of Donald Duck's and Uncle Scrooge stories, and there's a lot of great nonsense in those stories.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember the one where Donald and the boys are going up to the money bin, and they have to speak a code into the speaker to get the gate to open. So they chant this nonsense rhyme, right? And or then there's also, when they met exotic tribes, there would be the mock language made to represent the different languages of the tribes they visited and so on. And so what Karl Barks got me to realize when I was a very young kid was that nonsense is not just one thing. There's a lot of different types of nonsense. And in my career, I have identified over 70 different types, each having its own distinct structure. And I gather from a cognitive psychologist friend of mine who got very enthusiastic about my work, and he was saying that he is absolutely sure that once they hook people up with their scanners and so on, they will be able to show that different types of nonsense absolutely recruit different areas of the brain. And so we are into a whole new field here. I have kind of I'm resting now in the awareness that eventually this is going to have to catch on. It's already been published in France, but I can't find an American publisher yet because we came over here and we had to survive, right? So Americans, the practicality that really is the wonderful feature of our society, and at the same time, that does bring with it a little bit of anti-intellectualism, as Hofstadter said in his famous book about anti-intellectualism among the American people. And that's all right, because, this is the great, where else would you rather live, right? And, this is the greatest civilization, in my opinion, that there's ever been. And so I understand why the majority of Americans just don't like to think, and that's all right. And at the same time, to think that you're going to gain ground on the biggest question of existence without putting some hard conceptual thought into it is just a fantasy. And I find about this whole field that we're in, Lee, is that it leaves people unsatisfied, right? They go to the convention or to the conference and be with everybody who's talking about this with that wonderful look in their eyes and smiling and hugging and all. And but it leaves people unsatisfied. They hear the charismatic speaker saying, yes, there is an afterlife. And that makes people feel good for about a day. And then they go home. And then, at the end of the next week, they feel like they need another dose of the charismatic speaker. Well, to me, that is rather abhorrent behavior. I've always been so uncomfortable with that. And,
Ray, it's what puzzles me is even people who've had profound NDEs and come back with an understanding that love is the entire answer to it, have so much trouble loving, or promoting promoting that knowledge.
Yes. George Ritchie, the first living person I ever heard this from in 1965. To this day, Lee, George was just the greatest guy I ever knew. Just the finest human being. And he told me that one day very specifically. He said, Ray, he said, this experience makes your humanity even more of a burden in a way. And what he was talking about was exactly that you have this vision in which you see for sure the power of love and the importance of love. And yet you find yourself in a day-to-day basis, exploding at people or saying things which you hadn't said. And so, I think you're absolutely right in that observation.
Consider the part of the story of where at the end, just before we're reincarnated, there's a choice. There's a choice given to us of what our next life will be.
That's
and
right.
There's also a toss of the dice that fate will have a determination as well.
That's right.
And maybe that fate part just traps us in our humanity so that we can't bring back from heaven what we learn from heaven.
It may be, and that's a good point. And when I think about that, I get to thinking that that the essence of this life is to have certain things excluded, right? Like Plato said, it's like we're like horses with blinders on. And that there's a large part of reality that we can't perceive. And my thought is that is part of the nature of this experience that we're in, that we couldn't be having this experience we're having now if all of this other knowledge was kind of flooding in on us. And Plato also says, and as you know in that story, that at a certain point, just before people come back here, they drink of the waters of forgetfulness, he said.
Yes.
And they forget all they know. And the modern term for that phenomenon is called an event boundary, and which is a psychological term. And what an event boundary is, it's like when you are in your living room and you think of something you want to get in the kitchen, right? So you walk through the door and you forget what you came in there for, right?
Yes.
That's an event boundary. And it's it has to do with the fact that the mind sort of puts things into little packets or compartments to process. And once you get out of that little packet, then you lose that access to that information. Yeah.
If nonsense were one day proven to be meaningful in a sensible way, would that make it nonsensical and thereby weaken its
What a
effectiveness?
great point. This is just, and I addressed that in my book, and thank you for that, because the essence of nonsense is to be nonsense, right? That that nonsense itself has a structure, and yet over a passage of time, something that is nonsensical in one frame of reference can become intelligible. For example, the example I often use is if you think yourself back to the mindset of an educated person living in the year 1915, all right? And you hear the following sentence. All four of Ethel's grandparents were lost in a shipwreck long before her mother and father were born. That is nonsensical in 1915.
Mm-hmm.
Because then we knew about DNA, but we did not know the role of DNA in genetics. We didn't understand gene splicing, gene editing, cloning, and so on. But now that we do, we have discovered those things. That makes the sentence. All four of Ethel's grandparents were lost in a shipwreck long before her mother and father were born. It hasn't happened yet, to our knowledge, but it's conceivable it could, so it makes sense. And for reasons that I will elaborate on Tuesday night, and I'm looking forward to seeing your response, but technically speaking, in terms of logic, sentences like there is life after death are unintelligible.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we have now new means to work on this so that we can bring that concept into the realm of the intelligible. And I'm really interested to see your response to this. Matter of fact, this is stepping out of my bounds here, but I'm just thinking about this. How about we go through this Tuesday, and then, if you want to, we can talk again the next week or whenever you want.
I was just going to suggest that myself. I think that's a wonderful idea. I think that's just a terrific idea, because then I will have been exposed to more of your thinking on this, and I'll be able to, I won't be talking total nonsense to you after Tuesday.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that occurred to me was, along with the genetic example you gave, such discoveries as the quantum or fractals or MC squared, all of those things would have sounded like nonsense to science before the time that they were proven to be real.
Absolutely. And in science, nonsense, by which I mean, of course, meaningless, unintelligible language, not anything bad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the word nonsense in ordinary language is a pejorative, right? It's a negative connotation. However, it's the strangest thing is that in reality, people just love nonsense. You think that you're a little young to remember, but when I was a kid, there was doo-wop music, right? Like, sha-na-na-na-na, sha-na-na-na-na, get a job.
Get a job.
Nonsense Tom's parts were played off against the meaningful parts, or hickory-dickory-dock, the mouse ran up the clock, and so on, or the playground rhymes and nonsense that children love, and Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll. And
I love Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll both.
Me too.
Listen, I'm so looking forward to Tuesday. And you quoted something my mother used to say to me that at the speech last Thursday. One bright day in the middle of the night, two dead boys got up to fight. That whole thing came rushing back to my mind. Raymond, I'm afraid we're out of time for today already. Perhaps you could tell our listeners how they can find your books.
Well, yes, I think they're in a lot of bookstores and, of course, on Amazon. And the famous one, I guess, is lifeafterlife.com. I'm sorry, is the website is lifeafterlife.com, but the book is Life After Life. Yep.
And do you have a website or Facebook that?
Yes, it is. It's lifeafterlife.com.
Okay. Thank you so much for a fascinating discussion, and we'll continue this next Monday if we can work that out. And if our listeners would like to listen to this or any of our past programs, just go to our website at nderadio.org, and for information about IANDS and their upcoming conference in Denver, go to their website, iands.org, and tune in again next Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern, for more of NDE Radio and more of Raymond Moody. This is Lee Witting saying thanks for listening.